What's going on, Justin? How are you today?
What's up, my boy? I'm good. I'm good. How you doing?
Good.
How you live? You good?
I'm good. Just been working. Here we are in the new format that we've been talking about for it's probably been about a month or so, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so. Something like that. Been working
Yeah, something
hard.
like that. Yeah. Here we are. Quick shout outs to friends of ours, Matt and Ben. Matt for kind of helping us, kind of helping us get started on doing the online format like this, but then also Ben, who's been doing some editing in the background. We love you guys and we appreciate you.
Shout out to you. Shout
Thank
out
you
to
so
you. Couldn't do
much.
it without you. Yeah.
Of course, of course. Um, so before we get into today's topic, Justin, I just want to ask how you doing, what you've been up to, what's been on your mind.
Man, I've been living. I've been living. I've been doing things, just working. You know me, boy. I'm always working on something,
I
doing
do.
something. And
Yeah,
just having fun, man. And I can't wait to get started on this in our online format because scheduling has been a major challenge with this thing
it
and
has. And
I'm ready to be able to get through it.
this being kind of this whole podcasting thing, kind of still being a relatively new thing for us. We're learning, and I'm sure the audience
Right,
is
right.
so just as much as the audience is going to learn from us, we're also learning along the way. But I mean, that's part of it, and I am happy that we're making progress to kind of ultimately platform ourselves and try to help
Mhm.
some guys out there. I know recently we've been kind of trying to figure out what today's topic would be, and ultimately we landed on this idea of social media, how we have more, you know, we're more connected than we ever have been before, specifically men. Um, and even though that's the case, even though we have all these outlets to talk to people and be social, we also have, anxiety is through the roof more than it ever has been before in human history, at least as far as we've been recording such things.
Mhm.
And and two, there's definitely a loneliness epidemic going on. And I'm sure like, not just men, all genders are struggling with that to some degree,
Mhm.
but but today we're kind of going to hit on specifically, men just because, well, obviously we're men.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we will probably be able to relate a little bit more. Uh, but so kind of giving that framework, what kind of pops in your head there, Justin? And where because I know you can take this and run with it for
Yeah, you know it. We'll
yeah,
be here all
you
day.
can run.
We'll be here all
Yeah, we'll
day.
be here all day. Well, you'll be here all day.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
will.
you'll leave. You'll leave like a
Yeah,
reasonable
I
person.
will.
Like somebody
Yeah.
reasonable. But no, man, the main things that come to mind is exactly what you said, man. As far as data shows us, anxiety levels and depression levels are at an all-time high, which is crazy because our life objectively, especially here in the West, in America and American culture, we've never had it better, objectively. And yet we feel the worst about it than we ever have across measured human history. And one of those limitations is about the human to human connection that, on one hand, has become a lot more efficient with the online and the rise of online stuff, but we almost in some ways have gained a lot of efficiency and sacrificed a lot of fulfillment. And I truly believe that that's one of the reasons that we have such a difficult time with anxiety and depression. And there's a host of other factors that we could spend forever talking about and unpacking. But one of those is definitely a lack of fulfilling human to human connection.
Mm.
And maybe you've experienced that, especially since COVID, dude. Ever since COVID, things got
Yeah.
even more online than they were already.
Yeah. I remember. I mean, so to kind of give, I guess, you know this about me, but to kind of also give the audience a little bit of insight about me. So primarily, a lot of my hobbies include watching shows, movies, and gaming, which while nothing inherently wrong with those things, I have definitely experienced the negative drawbacks of those things, whether they're in excess or they're just I guess I mean they keep you inside. They keep you from things like sunlight by actually interacting with people out there. So I've definitely gone through those things. You were talking about COVID. I remember back during COVID. I mean, I've always been like on a computer or something even before COVID, but when COVID happened, I actually had to work from home. And at that time, I was living on my own in an apartment all by myself. I didn't even have a goldfish. Like it was just me. It was me and the cockroaches in the walls.
Holding it down.
And yeah, yeah. And it was kind of, I remember when COVID hit and for the first like 3 months, because I had before COVID, I had like an office job. I would commute to an office every day. And I remember thinking, man, I mean, don't get me wrong, pandemic's bad, but like me being the person I am, this is kind of sweet. Like I get to work from home. That was my first time
Yeah,
experiencing kind of like a
right.
remote job. And it was cool for the first like 3 months, I would say. But if you would have told me ahead of time that I was going to be stuck in my apartment for 8 months straight, man, I think I would have treaded a little more lightly in that scenario. Because when month 8 hit, I was, man, those walls were closing in.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and the thing is, and kind of bring it back around to the topic going on, or that we have today, is that even though I was inside my apartment primarily, it's not like I wasn't talking to people. I was definitely like I was in Discord calls with people. I was playing games with people. I was even calling family members on the phone, making sure they're okay. So it's not like I was just completely closed off to those people in my life. But for some reason, excuse me,
it
but for some reason, for lack of better phrasing, it did not hit the same.
ain't the same.
It's
Ain't
not
the
the
same.
same.
Hmm.
It's not the same as seeing those people in person, interacting with them in person. And I think it's more. I do think there's more to it than just that, than
Yeah,
than just being in the same room. There could also be activities that you're engaging in together. I mean, there's a host of things there. But it did not matter how many times I talked to someone through a microphone with a headset on. I felt it.
yeah. They
And
have a term for that that's even been around since before COVID. You ever heard of the term going stir crazy?
I have, yeah, that sounds like something my mom would say. Yeah, that's a
Hmm.
shout out to
Hmm.
my mom, Holly. That's a Hollyism.
Yep,
Yeah,
yep.
I'm not gonna share all of the Hollyisms on
Sure,
here,
sure.
but that one is definitely one I heard growing up, and it's that feeling of, at least for me, like whenever I'm like stir crazy, it's that feeling of I have a plethora of things that I could do, and yet I don't want to do any of them.
Hmm. Yeah,
But
yeah. And I think they have the term cabin fever. Isn't that about
yeah.
isolation? I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think that one's about isolation in particular.
That one would probably be a better way to describe my experience during that time. And so, like, it begs the question, right? To bring us back to kind of what we're talking about, it begs the question, what's bringing on those feelings whenever you still have we've advanced so much, so far as socially, at least in the realm of tech, we've advanced so far. We have all these different tools at our disposal to talk to people, but yet there's something missing. There's
Yeah.
something that's not there, and I kind of want to, and we'll get into that. But before we do, what was your experience like during that crazy time?
Back in the COVID time, man, it was a little bit different because back then I was still doing therapy, still getting my hours towards licensure, and the field that I worked in, well, obviously I work in the mental health field, but specifically the job field that I was in at that time, I did a lot of in-home stuff, in-home therapy.
Mm,
So I was interacting with a fair share of people, and that was before we went strictly online. Uh, but at that time, I was working a lot with people. Uh, and in terms of socially, there was a lot of fear, man. There's a lot of fear of uncertainty and just a general existential, like what is happening and is society
mm,
collapsing. I actually got my full license landed. I'll never forget this a day, for the rest of my life. But I got my license, my full license. I got it in my email. And and in the therapy world, getting your full license, man, that's the top of the mountain. That's the top of the mountain. And
yeah,
I
dude,
finally
I
actually.
remember. I remember when you were working on that. It felt like you were working on that for 50 years.
Yeah, trust me, it felt like 100. But when I got my full therapy license, Landon, I actually got that in March of 2020, and 2 weeks after I got it. So I got my license, I signed the contract to join private practice, and 2 weeks after that, COVID hit and shut down society. I was still doing some in-home therapy stuff at that particular time, but I was already transitioning out of it, and it became a challenge just trying to figure out, okay, now I am trying this whole other business venture, and I don't know, I don't know what this means or what I'm supposed to do now. And
That's what a crazy time. Now that I've actually never really talked to you about that time, but what a crazy time for you to like come out of school here you are stepping out kind of, into the real world that a lot of people like to throw around and, really actually, get your career going and the world is falling apart. That's wild. I've never considered that.
Yeah, man, it was a time and a half. It was a time and a half. Um, circling back to that sense of isolation that you're talking about, man. I'm gonna unpack it a little bit, but first I just got to tease the
Sure.
bit just a little bit further.
Yeah.
So let me pose this to you, see what you think, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Because we're talking about isolation and how it affects people, right? And,
Yeah.
and we're talking about specifically COVID and what was going on in the world. But let me ask you this: what do you think, generally speaking? And I'm not going to ask you to be specific, just better or worse. Generally speaking, what do you think happens when you take a person away from interacting with any human being for a week, a month, a year, several years, uh, and do similarly to what they do in prison systems and put people in solitary confinement, where people are isolated totally from other human beings and have nothing but their own thoughts, their own minds, and maybe the sounds of other people, maybe the brief interactions with uh, individuals on a person to person basis. But put that person in a situation like that and keep them there for a week, a month, a year, a couple years. And do you think, generally speaking, on the other side of that, they're going to come out better or worse?
Probably better. No, I'm just kidding. No, definitely worse. And I mean, thank God. Obviously, I've never been through anything quite that awful. But but I can tell you from my experience that after the 8 months of being as isolated as I've ever been in my apartment, it didn't exactly do wonders for, anxiety. It didn't exactly do um it didn't exactly do any wonders when it came to, holding off things like depression.
Right.
And I think not think I think it's safe to say I know that a lot of people were experiencing that during that time. I mean, how could you not? You've completely derailed people's normal lives that they've known since birth.
Absolutely. And the reason I bring that up, Landon, is because I think we
Yeah.
all, in some ways or another, experienced some form of light solitary confinement. And we all experienced, in some ways, the effects of such a thing. And like you said, anxiety levels were crazy, depression levels were crazy. One of the things that I saw in practice in my office and talking with clients a lot was it was kind of interesting. It was like a twofold kind of deal. On one hand, you had people who were like, my goodness, I've never spent this much time with my family and I love it. And I don't know if I'll ever go back to an office setting because I didn't realize how I never saw any of these people that I love. Um, and then on the other hand, we saw people who were like, don't get me wrong, I do love my family, but I work 8 feet from where I sleep and I never leave. And the idea of air quote going to work is so painful and so dreadful that I never want to do this ever in my life. And some of these people were the people who, before COVID, their dream scenario was to work online. And then when they had to do that for whatever reason, it can turn around. And I think one of the reasons for that, dude, is because our sense of identity is formed in relationships to people. And when we don't have people, then we don't do so hot as human beings. And there's plenty of reasons for that, but one of the primary ones that I want to focus on right now is just because we find our sense of emotional and physical, emotional, and all those deeper things. We find our sense of security in our relationships with people. Everything you know about yourself, every belief that you have, every perception about yourself has to do with either one, who you think you are, or two, who others think you are. And how you come to know what you are was based on the messages you got about yourself by other people, right? So everything about us is shaped through language and specifically through relationships and connections that we have with people. So when we don't have that, dude, when we don't have that, we don't know what to do with ourselves. We can manage for a particular period of time, and some of us are better at it than others. But by and large, on the whole, we don't know what to do with ourselves because we're not built for isolation. We never have been.
Yeah, and so what do you think it is? What do you think it is? Because like, well, why can't we get that through a phone screen? Why can't we get that through a computer screen? Why can't we get that, um, you know, over a call of any sort. What is it about being in the room with someone that is different? What kind of comes to mind whenever I say that?
Well, there's several different layers to it, man, but one of them is about these things related to oxytocin and dopamine, and also just again a sense of uh, security, social senses of security. The things about relationships that lots of people don't always readily attune to, which you might know, but maybe other people may have never thought about it very much. When we're interacting, Landon, like part of our relationship is about what's said. Part of our relationship is about what's not said. But then there's a whole other several layers about body language, about am I being heard? Am I being understood? That's why there's a big difference between talking to yourself and talking out loud in your apartment by yourself versus saying the same thing to another person.
Mm,
The reason is because we just have a different reaction to the interactions patterns as opposed to just being in isolation. There's a weightness to it. There's a heavier element to it. There's a sense of, of connection, and the impacts of that connection aren't always there on online or the screen because we may be understood on a literal level, but we're not felt
mm.
always
There there
the way we are in person.
there is an element of like bodily presence that affects our communication with each other as humans, right? Like that idea of body language and how, it's one thing that something is said, it's another way and it's another thing in how it's said, right?
Hmm.
And I think we just get a clearer picture of how someone's trying to communicate whenever they are in the room with us. And that makes I think that just makes a world of difference. Just this idea of like presence and
Definitely.
and being there with someone else. Kind of to pivot away from COVID for a little bit. So, the reason I kind of wanted to dive into the pandemic is because I think socially it has done. I I think it's going to be a pivotal moment in time when we look back on things like people interacting with each other through social media. That's going to be a pivotal point in time. Now, obviously, before the pandemic, we were kind of already headed in the trajectory of, people being more chronically online than ever before, communicating through things like Facebook, Instagram, all these different platforms. But I think the pandemic compounded that so much,
Hmm.
and so I kind of want to pivot into what life is like on the other side of it now. Now that we're past it, we're a good 5 years removed from the pandemic.
Hmm.
I know we were talking about this actually before we hopped on the episode. How as far as like hobbies, for men go, more now than ever before are men. More and more men are flooding to going online with their hobbies and their free time. Um, Obviously, things like movies, video games are not necessarily new concepts,
Hmm.
but they have definitely blown up. Those industries have gotten more popular than ever before, and I think it's safe to say that more men than ever are flocking to online hobbies, spending their free time online, and that doesn't necessarily mean playing a game, but that could be talking with people,
Hmm.
um, watching things together online. There's a host of things that people can do, and yet I think a lot of them are finding that they're unfulfilled, and so we have this idea of a loneliness epidemic going on between men. And I know that I can personally speak to some of this. I won't dive too deep, but there have been times in my life where you know I've played a game for 5, 6, 7 days straight in my free time. Not to say that I haven't done anything productive, but I'm going to work, I'm doing the things I need to do, and then I'm coming home and I'm just blasting hours away on these things. These things that most of the time I do enjoy, but unfortunately I didn't feel the negative ramifications until a month passes me and I realize, crap, I haven't even like hung out with my friends, or at least hung out with my friends in person. Um, Thank God. It's actually, it's actually kind of funny that we're doing this episode now because tonight, I know me and you, we're going to be hanging out with some friends later.
Yeah,
We're watching The Last of Us season 2 premiere. I'm so
real,
excited about
real
that.
excited for that. Yeah.
Yeah, very excited. Season 1 was phenomenal. And,
Hmm.
and and the reason why I'm excited is because and it's not because of like not because of anything like we're all doing our own thing online or whatever, but just life's been busy. We're all kind of growing up, and
Hmm.
we just haven't been able to get together in a while. And so I'm looking forward to just being in the same room with our circle.
I want to go back to that, what you just said, Len, about being in the same room, because
Yeah.
one of the things, and we do this occasionally. We will get online and play a game together and just, all those things. And so a question a person might have is like, well, if I'm hanging out with people and I'm doing it online and we're talking, or even if we're like doing it in Discord, maybe we're physically seeing each other. Like we said before, there's something different about being in person, but how much different is that? And there's a whole lot of different factors that can play into it, but one thing I really want to highlight here, dude, is that unless you're talking about your really close friends, and even then there's some limitation, but unless you're talking about some really close friends, generally speaking, if you're online a lot and you're interacting with folks online, and when I say online, I don't mean video games necessarily. I mean video games, Tinder, Messenger,
Mm.
any kind of like social media platform, what you're experiencing or what you have the opportunity to experience is all the upside of relationships and none of the downside. And so one of the things that can happen with that, man, is that you almost in some ways can lose your ability to handle downside in relationships. And one of the things
Hmm.
that's so interesting about online relationships and communities is that, see, if I get annoyed at somebody I'm playing a game with, I can just log off. But if tonight when we go to this thing with our friends, if somebody annoys me, I have to sit there and deal with it on some
Oh,
level.
I mean, you could make a scene if
I,
you wanted
and
to.
and maybe, but that's me dealing with it. Or I could avoid it.
Yeah.
But I'd have to deal with that anxiety on some level. So
Right.
what
Right.
happens when you have a generation of people who have only ever experienced the bulk of their social interactions with through this lens of experiencing all the dopamine, all the positivity, all the upside of relationships, and as soon as it gets difficult, you can just leave. Well, what we have, and there's a lot of different layers to it, but one of the things that come about is that these folks, whether they're kids or adults or people who at one time weren't like this, but now, because of a lot of different factors, have found themselves like this, they kind of lose the ability to naturally be able to handle that anxiety. And so that anxiety becomes crippling when it used to be manageable. And so now, what happens after that? Well, typically, you want to not be in that situation. And so, how do we deal with that? Well, normally we avoid it. And so, we avoid anything that's going to maybe push us to the downside of relationships. But because we avoid those downsides, we never learn how to deal with those downsides. And because we never learn how to deal with those downsides, then when they come, it actually amplifies an anxiety response even more than that. And so it's on one hand it limits our sense of fulfillment. On the other hand, it also can damage our ability to be able to effectively cope with the natural anxiety that comes with fulfilling relationships. Because as you know, and the people that you feel closest to are the people you've gone through not only ups with, but you've also went through downs with.
You know, you kind of said something that kind of made me think of this. Would you say that, and I'm gearing us towards how this affects men specifically. Would you say that the lack of those downsides, the lack of experiencing those hardships, the lack of having to confront issues head on if they do arise when we're interacting with people, not necessarily, and when I say issues, I want to be clear, I don't necessarily mean always something negative. I just mean anything. Good, bad, sad, whatever. But would you say that because of how more and more how everybody's behind a screen or behind a keyboard of some kind, or I should say men, the more and more that men are behind a screen, behind a keyboard, all of that, that we're losing our, and I hate to phrase it this way, but I believe it's accurate because it's always kind of seen as a masculine trait to confront things head on. Would you say that ability, that trait is being lost to more and more generations as we move forward to confront issues head on?
Lost, I'm not sure about lost, but it's definitely
Sure.
challenged for sure. Because
Challenged.
what happens when go back to let's go back to our childhood for a second, Lynn. I
Yeah,
don't know about
certainly.
you. Growing up, I interacted with the neighborhood kids a lot. And I probably didn't interact with neighborhood kids nearly as much as my parents did or their parents did. But when you're interacting with a bunch of people in real life, what exactly are you going through there? And like back then, when I was an early teenager or even a young kid, um, every time I was bored, I wanted to go down the street to see my friends and see what they were doing and try to see what we could get up to. Do you remember that? Did you have some experience like that?
Yeah, I grew up. Yeah, I definitely grew up. I mean, different from you, but not different in the sense that I was a neighborhood kid. I had at the time I had a best friend who lived down the road, and if I wanted to do something, I didn't boot up a machine, I didn't turn on a phone. I mean, I did have like a Nintendo and all that growing up, but it wasn't as prevalent for me at that time. I would just hop on my bike and ride down the road, and we would and see what we're doing that day. So yeah, I'd totally relate.
Yep. So let's go. Let's just unpack that briefly, man. What are the things when you live life that way? What are the things that you maybe naturally encounter that that maybe you never thought of? One of them is you deal with lots of different personalities. If you have several friends in the neighborhood, chances are
Yeah.
they're all slightly different. So you have to know how to navigate that. You also know how to deal with social conflict because if you want to hang out, if you want to play, well, guess what? It ain't always going to be great all the time. So you're going to have to deal with the ups and the downs. And you're going to have to deal with being misunderstood. And you're going to have to deal sometimes with getting in trouble for things you didn't intend or didn't even do entirely, right? There are a lot of confrontation, or not even confrontation. There are a lot of challenges that you have to navigate, and that hones your ability to be able to navigate that stuff in other contexts, right? And then by the time you go in to get a job in the workplace, well, you know how to talk to strangers because you've met new kids at school before, or and you interact with them in that way, or maybe you found new kids in the neighborhood that you introduced to. You know how to, for instance, share common interests and understand that not everybody's going to have the interests that you do, and that doesn't mean you can't have them. That just means we got to make room for both, right? So we're learning all these things socially about giving and taking and confrontation or confrontation navigation or social skills on how to settle disputes and how to be fair to one another, right?
Yeah,
You
and I mean,
take
if somebody gets on your nerves, you can't just exit out of a call, you know?
Right. You have to figure
Yeah.
out at least how to socially like navigate out of that. So what happens when you don't have the ability to naturally, organically build those skills because all you've ever been exposed to is the ups, and all you've ever been exposed to is as soon as it gets difficult, I can just leave and not have to be in a place where I have to navigate that stuff. Well, what happens is you don't have the skills, and so then you don't really know how to coordinate it or carry it out all the time. And I think most of the folks maybe who listen to our podcast are somewhere close to our age, and so they might remember a time where they were a lot more social, and so really what we have to do, I believe, is kind of get back to that. It's not bad to have a online presence. It's certainly not. Social media does have its good qualities. It allows us to maintain a lot of relationships with not a lot of physical labor, which is really good. But at the same time, it has some limitations, and we need to be able to feel fulfilled. And so we need to have interactions with people, and we need to go through disagreements with people, and we need to go through uh, good times, sad times, hard times, fun times, exciting times, etc. And they need to be with people. And we need to be able to have our alone time. But I think nowadays we may be going a little further and saying, I want to be alone a lot more. And
Mm.
maybe what I'm suggesting is maybe we don't need to be alone nearly as much as we might believe that we do.
Do you think that do you th- going to that idea of people, because that's another aspect of this that's very fascinating to me is there definitely is a how should I phrase this? I think that right now people look fondly on this idea of being independent and I mean independent in the sense of like doing everything on your own, being this like, and man, I hate to use this phrase, but like, because it's really cringy, but it will convey what I'm trying to say. This like kind of like this like lone wolf mentality, you know?
Hmm.
And I do, and I remember like I know that I just don't remember like growing up that being like it wasn't even on people's radar
Yeah.
to function that way. Um, and so I want to bring it back to, do you think us being more connected than ever before socially, through our phones, through all these different things that we have, do you think that in some ways because we're so connected it's backfired and it's reinforced this idea of, well, you don't need any of that stuff. In fact, you don't even need to, not only do you not need any of that stuff, you don't even need to like, you don't even like need to go interact with like your friends. Like you don't need your friends, you know.
Yeah.
You can handle a lot of things on your own. Obviously, I'm exaggerating a bit. I
Sure.
don't think
Sure.
anyone's out here peddling that, you know, peddling don't go see your friends in the street.
Hmm.
But there is this idea of we won't delve too much into this, but it even goes as far as like romantic relationships. There's this idea of like, well, you don't, man, you don't just get over it. You don't need anyone. Like you don't need her. You don't need him.
Hmm.
You know, so I just kind of wanted to bounce that. Do you think that that is in some ways the social media has created that backfire on us?
Yeah, I think so. Not so much that it's social media's fault, as much as social media propagates the idea a lot further than maybe it's helpful. Earlier, we talked about how identity is formed in a way, and to like really simplify it in certain ways, certain terms, and I would say that uh, we are somewhere between who we believe that we are and who other people believe that we are. So to come back to that
Mm,
idea of like, do we need people? We do, we do. And when it comes to independence, see, I think one of the challenges that is often framed in social media as very, very simple, but it's actually very complicated in my opinion, is that when you think of who you are as a person, a lot of times we want to say, well, I'm an independent person. You ever notice how nobody wants to be a dependent person, especially in our
yeah,
Western civilization? Like nobody's
I've
nobody's going out champion that, right?
yeah, never heard it once.
Yeah, and in fact, in some circles, you could hear this term that we call codependence, which is to suggest that your mood, your thoughts, your actions, your sense of self, your sense of identity, if we, when you call someone codependent, what you're meaning is that they are overly connected and that they are overly influenced to a detrimental degree. And so a lot of times it's framed as if you have independence on one side of the spectrum and codependence on the other side of the spectrum, and that if you're codependent, your thing is you need to be independent, and if you're masculine, or if you're like doing it right, then you're going to be super independent and all these things. I think that's a product of our culture, but it's definitely like something that's uh, elevated through social media as this thing about there's more value to be independent. The truth is, Landon, I think we're all interdependent, that we are both in need of independence and we're in need of being dependent on others. And I think that that's super important to the development of people. Those of us who want to be alone are probably, by and large, those of us who can't be alone. And those of us who don't want to be alone the most are the ones who are forced into this sense of isolation. It's the ability to choose. Right. And
Yeah,
like you said, this thing about like this idea that you don't need these people. You don't need, to put up with X, Y, and Z and whatever. Um, but when we talk about need, we that's a whole other conversation between needs and wants. But when we talk about need, it's need to accomplish what end? If you want to feel fulfilled, then you need people. If you want to feel accomplished, then a part of you, not all of it, but a part of it, you will need some level of social validation, right? That we're social beings. We always have been, and that's never going to
yeah.
change. And so this idea, like I think social media, one of the drawbacks of social media is that it's by its nature, it's very polarizing, and it very much tries to simplify stuff that's way more complicated than we give it credit for. So
Unfortunately, including the news, but
yeah,
we're not going to open that up.
definitely, definitely, that's a whole other thing. That's a
Yeah.
but when we talk,
But I had to throw it in there because I did want to point out that like obviously social media affects people and their relationships, but it's leaking into everything, how we see the world. But anyways, continue. I'm sorry.
well, going back to that idea of all the upside with none of the downside, one of the things that social media and really just media in general can do is it can um, tailor things to elevate people's standards to an unreasonable degree. So because we're so used to uh, having all the upside with none of the downside. So if a person is not constantly validating me or constantly agreeing with my ideas or constantly approving of what I think or what I got going on, the tendency now is to avoid it or resist it really hard. But because social media is very polarizing, there's not a whole lot of elevation for this idea that there's room for multiple ideas at the same time. Um, and that applies, like you said, even with relationships, because you hear a lot about people being like, well, if your partner is not doing this for you and not doing that for you, you don't need to be with them. You need to just leave them because it's cool to be single. Sure. It's also cool to make sacrifices and do what you need to do in relationships to maintain them, right? But it's not as you don't get a whole lot of clicks promoting that kind of stuff. But I think it helps folks create sometimes unreasonable standards, and that can be a definite challenge in a lot of relationships.
I know where we still have a little bit of time left, so I kind of want to move us on here. So let's I kind of want to back us out here. And you were talking about relationships, and I almost opened up the can of worms when it came to like, because you talked about people's expectations and how social media has warped that in a lot of ways. And I just another thing I want to throw in there is, I mean, you're seeing that primarily through things like dating apps
Hmm.
and this and and now it occurs everywhere, but specifically in dating apps. Now you've got people denying others for really some of the most shallow things ever, and it happens on both sides. Let me be very clear. There is no innocent side to this. But
Sure.
I did want to just sprinkle that in there. But moving on here, I kind of wanted to back out on this concept. So do you think that as we currently now, but also moving forward, do you think that how social media has evolved, do you think it is a net positive or a net negative, specifically for men?
Specifically for men. So let me do
And I know there's
one
a
of the
lot there. I know
sure.
there's a lot there, but I kind of wanted to get, I guess the spark notes of it, so to speak.
Sure. So let me do something that that I do all the time in our personal thing. I'm gonna
Yeah,
rephrase. I'm going to purposely not answer the question in a way to answer the question. So
sure.
when it comes to social media, if you're out there and you're listening to me and Landon right now, my boy, check it out. Go outside, interact with people, go through ups and downs, embrace that anxiety. It's going to make you a better person. And if you don't know how to navigate that, if you run into a bunch of challenges with that, go to therapy. My
Mm.
boy, just go ahead and do that. And when it comes to games, have your games. Enjoy your community. But just remember, there's nothing quite like being in the same room and feeling understood by people that you care about and who care about you. And go and do social media. Stay connected. Like we said, we can be connected with people from different countries, man. This is awesome. It's a great time to be alive. But that ain't all life is, bro. Go out there, interact with people, because you know what's going to happen. Like one day when you're on in your dying days, you're not going to think to yourself, "Man, I really wish I would have spent more time alone inside." That's not going to happen, right?
Sure.
You need to go outside, touch some grass, get some sunlight, interact with people, go through the ups and downs, and become a better person for it. And when it comes to social media and all that stuff, hey man, do your thing, be entertained, but don't lose the plot. It's just entertainment. It ain't life. That ain't real. And go outside and interact with people. And
And,
yeah, it's
and,
gonna
and let
suck
me add to
sometimes.
that, the comment thread under things you read are not real. And
That
what I
ain't
like, and like, don't get me wrong, like, obviously those are, well, who knows with bots and stuff, but for the sake of the conversation, obviously those are real people commenting things, having conversations. But 99% of threads you read online, that is not how real life conversation works. And the reason I bring that up is because I see that a lot through feeds that I look at. I see like people just in there arguing and discussing things, and they probably know nothing about it. And so I just wanted to emphasize, because and I emphasize because of mistakes that I've made in the past reading things, because it's easy to get caught in the wormhole of, man, is this really how people are viewing or seeing the certain topic? The answer is no, it's not.
right.
At least most of the time. I can't say all, but anyways, continue.
Right, man. And if you listen, if you got somebody that disagrees with you fundamentally like that in real life, guess what happens in real life? You just talk to them and you try to understand their perspective. And then you might
And
walk
you
away
can
from that realizing that you
and you
have
can
more in common with them
disagree.
than not.
And you can disagree. You don't have to put them on blast in a comment thread. And not saying that's happened to me. Let me be very clear. That has not happened to
Sure,
me.
sure.
But
But to go back to it, when you talk to somebody, you can interact with them. You can have a disagreement. And if you do it in person and you don't avoid the conversation and neither one of you can walk away just as soon as somebody says something that you don't like, then you might come to find out they're more like you than they are not, or unlike you. And I think that's what it's all about, man. Just coming back to remembering that social media is a gift. It's great and it has its definite benefits. But if we start making the mistake that that's what life's about, we're going down a hole that we don't need to go down. Isolation ain't good for people. It never has been. And connecting on screens is great. It's better than nothing, but it ain't the end all be all.
I think I would and I echo everything you just said there, Justin, but I think I would want to emphasize that social media inherent like I think it's best used as a tool to accomplish certain things, a tool to maybe speak with people you normally don't get to speak to on a regular basis. But don't I don't think it needs to be anything more than that. Um, yeah. And I think I think we just all need to I think we as men need to really reevaluate um our relationship with social media. And while we're at it, and it's kind of the pot calling the kettle black here, but and while we're at it, but like cuz me like I'm online a lot. I play games a lot, all that good stuff. But even there's been times where I've had to reevaluate like am I doing this too much?
Yeah.
And a lot of times I come to the answer of yes, or at least I come to that answer after feeling a certain way,
Mhm.
and and so I would just encourage because I know you're out there because I interact with people like me in games and stuff almost on a daily basis. Like I would just encourage guys out there that are like me to kind of take our advice and get out a little bit. Try to and if you don't have a ton of people to meet friends, like the only way you're gonna get out there and meet friends is get out there.
Definitely
And
embrace the risk. Got to embrace the risk. Now, don't
yeah,
overly expose yourself to a point of extreme discomfort, but make yourself a little uncomfortable. You got to go do it because if not, then you'll never learn how to deal with it, and then it'll just be a repeating pattern. So, like Landon said, man, enjoy social media, but just remember that well, and we know this, but it's an algorithm. Its whole thing is to keep you engaged, and the way it does that is by polarizing what you're seeing, and stay informed about what's going on out here, but then leave that and go to your neighborhood, go to your relationships, and go live the real life. Because whatever happens out there is whatever happens, but your life is right in front of you, and so we gotta go be a part of that.
absolutely. Yeah, get out there and I want to point out also that I don't your relationships will not only improve socially, but I would argue almost every facet of your life can, whether it is you're trying to get out there and find a job, um, if you're getting out there and you're trying to exercise more, whatever it is that you are trying to accomplish in your life. Almost, I'm not going to say all because there are clearly things that you can accomplish at a computer, but or behind a screen or whatever. But almost every facet of your life can improve if you just kind of get out there and live life a little bit.
Yeah,
Um, the social media is going to be there. Um, and again, I just want to emphasize use it as a tool. And just as time goes on, because it's easy to get into the rhythm of just picking up your phone, turning on the TV, turning on the computer. Just no, and there's nothing inherently wrong with those things, but just constantly be reevaluating as life goes on, and because if you're not careful, you'll blink and you'll be you'll be older and you'll realize, well, was spending all my time that way really worth it? And I mean, only you can answer that, but I know for me, the answer to that would probably be no.
yeah.
Um,
And the
but
truth is, man, if you stay inside, then nobody gets to know you, and they need to be able to
yeah,
know you.
yeah,
And so go do it. Go take that risk, and let's go.
I love it. So we're just about out of time here, but Justin, as always, it's a pleasure. Looking forward to the next time we can get together. This is Mental Caffeine, and I'm Landon,
And I'm Justin.
and we'll see you next time.